But Philippe, you come from this, renowned family in ocean conservation with your grandfather being Jacques Cousteau. How amazing is that? With your many travels over the years, I was wondering if there was just one travel story that really just had the most impact or something that really sticks out from your travels that you'd like to share.
There's so many over the years. Been to so many different countries and expeditions and adventures all over the world. But I think it's those formative ones that are oftentimes the most important. And, growing up with my grandfather, it was such an influence on me and so many people around the world for his documentaries and films. In fact, it was 76 years ago this year that he co-invented the aqualung or scuba diving and really opened up the oceans to the world. So listening to his stories and his adventures, I remember he always used to tell me that we are all connected. It's something that he really witnessed. I think when you think about post-war, the period that was really when he was doing most of his explorations, the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, that was really when we saw the explosion of tourism, of travel, when the world got a lot smaller. And he was one of those people that was the first to travel to many of these places and film and visit. And he always told me to remember just how connected we are as people. And I remember one time I was 16 years old and I was in Papua New Guinea. Now Papua New Guinea, of course, is an island just north, a very large island, just north of Australia. It's split in two. Half is part of Indonesia and the other half is an independent nation, Papua New Guinea, or PNG as people oftentimes refer to it as. And I had the opportunity to go on an expedition there with a remarkable, extraordinary pioneer, one of the first female oceanographers in the world, Dr. Eugenie Clark, who was friends with my grandfather and my father over the years and we stayed in contact with. She was doing a research trip to the eastern part of the country, an area called Milne Bay. So I went out there for 2 weeks on a research vessel with her. We were diving and doing research. And then I took a few days with a couple of the folks. And at the end of the trip, we went up to the highlands of Papua New Guinea and to visit with a tribe called the Huli people. Now, PNG is one of the last places on Earth that even today, some areas are basically unexposed to Western culture. But back then, several tribes were more or less uncontacted. Now, the Huli had been had a little bit of exposure, but they still lived in grass huts and had very few of the technological advancements we take for granted. They still hunted with bow and arrow, wore grass skirts and bare-chested, and had either, depending on what tribe, feathers or boar tusks in their noses, and would make these ornate wigs. They were called Huli wigmen, really remarkable place. And I was walking along the trail one day with a guide and taking photographs, and there was a group of tribesmen walking towards us, again, barefoot, grass skirts, bare-chested, spears and bow and arrow. They had just come out of the forest from hunting. And a little bit wary of us, they kind of quietly walked past, and it went descending age. So there was the elders kind of in the front and then younger men towards the back. And I remember the last boy in the group that was probably 15 or 16 years old, of about a dozen of these Huli men, was barefoot and had a grass skirt and a bow and arrow, but he was wearing a Lakers t-shirt. And I was just stunned, not only because I was born in Los Angeles, but because here we are in one of the most remote places in the world with a tribe that had very little exposure to the Western world. And clearly someone had given this to him, but it just reminded me, I could hear my grandfather whispering in my ear. He said, the golden threads around the world that unite us are unexpected, but indelible and undeniable. And we are all connected, and whatever we do in one place has an impact on another. We have to remember that. And that image of that young man in a Lakers shirt with a grass skirt and a bow and arrow, walking along that little trail is indelible and stuck in my mind.
Ashlan, I recently watched your TED Talk, which I thought was amazing. And I noticed you gave it in a very rare environment. I can imagine that was an extremely unique experience. Can you share more about what the talk was like and just what that experience was like for you?
Oh, the experience I'm very jealous of.
Well, so not that, okay, so a little secret about me is I am super competitive.
No. No.
Even with my husband, like when we go scuba diving, I try to see if I can be a better scuba diver than the Cousteau. And I don't
It's a
really even
thing.
know what that means. If I swim faster, I have more, well, usually I have, oh, you're good at your air consumption, but actually women usually are better at conserving their air while you're scuba diving. So that's just because we're awesome. But anyways, so well, maybe there's a few other things, but the one thing that I can say that I beat my husband to is I have been to all 7 continents, and Philippe has not. So I beat my husband to Antarctica. Thank you, darling. It was a trip of a lifetime. I was completely floored and beyond amazed to go down to the white continent. And so I went down for the 75th anniversary of, no, is that right? I went down for the anniversary of Scott Base, which is New Zealand scientific research base down in Antarctica. And we did a TEDx from there. And it was truly one of the most amazing experiences of my life. And I have traveled around the world, but this is something where the complete incredible situation from literally the moment I left New Zealand until the moment I returned to New Zealand, the entire thing felt like a dream. So to get down to Antarctica is not an easy feat, and especially when you're trying to go to the research station. So we actually flew down on a Hercules plane, which is a US military plane that had been retired, that was fitted with skis. And it was an 8-hour trip where we had to wear all of our Arctic survival gear in case we landed in the water. But let me tell you, if we landed in the water, nobody'd be surviving anything. So we all were kind of laughing about this. The bathroom was behind a curtain, and there was no bar cart on the Hercules, to say the least. But we went down with the scientists. It was absolutely amazing. And I will say that when we got there, they actually put us through the survival training that all the scientists have to go through. And in the summer, that means you have to sleep one night out on the ice. And it was the most incredible evening that I ever spent in my life. Probably that and my wedding night.
I was going to say, wait a minute.
You were like nudging me. I was like, oh, that and my wedding night.
Wait, what?
That and my wedding night.
And our daughter being born.
And our daughter being born. Well, that wasn't during the evening, but it was, so we had to build our own ice shelter, which I call an ice hole. And we had to lay on the ground, figure out, how big we were, how much space we needed to sleep. And because Antarctica is extremely dry, it's actually one of the driest places on the planet, which is weird when you think about how much ice that there is that covers the continent. But the ice, so that it's almost like just crystals. They call it diamond dust on Antarctica, because when you look out upon all of the snow and ice, it just looks like diamonds glittering back at you. So you lay down, you figure out how much bed space you want, and you just take more or less a machete and you cut these a square grid into the ice. The first scoop you scoop out and it doesn't work, so you throw that one away. But then all the other scoops, you get in and you literally pull out this giant block of ice. And you take that block of ice and you figure out which way the wind's coming, and you start making yourself a protective barrier. So there I am in Antarctica during the summer. It was -30, I think. It was -30 when you were in the Arctic.
Got down to -40 up in the Arctic.
Okay, so it was -30 for me. And I just had to build this little thing, and then, I slept there all night. And it's the summer, so it's super sunny there. It never gets dark. You have to make sure you're sleeping with your water, because otherwise your water freezes. And when you have to tinkle in the middle of the night, it's a whole rigmarole, which was not fun. But it was the best. It was the most incredible night. And I just remember they're laying there, and in Antarctica there really is no sound. So you're just there almost like in space, where there's like almost a sound vacuum in your head. And I remember thinking, my God, I am so far away from everything I know, from everyone I know, I'm so far away from humanity. And yet this continent is so important, and this ocean is so important to the rest of the planet, because it really does produce most of the marine nutrients that get then circulated all through. You know, our poles are so important in our ocean. And that night I vowed to always protect and look out for Antarctica, because it is a continent that is important and is so easily forgotten because it's just so far away.
Wow, what a story. I love how the TED Talk video shows the little sleep area that you carved out for yourself. And I was like, she slept there? But it was just for one night.
Just one night.
Yeah,
One night.
okay. And so, I mean, were you cold, or what was that like? I mean, you're I open on the ice.
So another secret about the two of us is between Philippe and I, he loves snowboarding. He loves the mountains. He loves the snow. Hate being cold. I'm a beach girl. So the entire time I was terrified that I was going to be cold, but I had like 30 layers on. And actually the problem in Antarctica is you want to make sure you don't overheat, because if you overheat, you sweat. And then if you get cold, that sweat will give you hypothermia.
Oh.
So I was okay, but the worst part was when you had a tinkle in the middle of the night, you have to get out of your pajamas, on your clothes, go into the little tent, because in Antarctica, they don't want you to leave it's no trace at all. So it's not like you can go and create yellow snow off in a corner. No. You have to go tinkle in the scientific bathroom tent, and then go back to your ice hole, try to take off all of your gear underneath your sleeping bag. Now the issue is, remember I told you it's super, super dry in Antarctica, so you have to constantly be drinking water.
Oh, so yeah.
One time in my life that I had to go to the bathroom 3 times in one night, and I was so mad. So I think I only slept about 45 minutes that night, but it was totally worth.
But you guys both worked on a really unique show together for Discovery Channel. Nuclear Sharks, right? It sounds super kind of freaky, but there's actually a really interesting story around it. And actually today I was reading an interesting article about how past places that have had like nuclear reactors, such as Chernobyl or Fukushima, have actually come back with wildlife in abundance. Tell us about the show and why it made such an impact on you guys.
Well, and it's actually really interesting when you think about the situation that we are in right now. Not that it is relatable to nuclear fallout, but that, you know, at this moment in time, nature has kind of been given this break. And we've seen these incredible things that nature has done with wildlife taking back over cities, and the birds, wherever you live, the birds, I mean, they're so loud outside. It's incredible. So yes, Mike, 100%. When it was 2016, 17, 16. We went to the place where the United States during the Cold War, it was the testing site for all of our nuclear bombs out in the middle of the Pacific in the Marshall Islands. And the United States detonated 23 nuclear bombs, the largest of which was the first hydrogen bomb ever created by the United States, and the largest bomb we ever created ever, called Castle Bravo. It was so powerful. It was 1,000 times more energy than the bomb that we dropped in Hiroshima. So if that gives you any type of power, it was bad. So when they dropped this bomb, the mushroom cloud was 4.5 miles across. It was so hot when it exploded that it was actually measured almost the same temperature as the surface of our sun. And everything, as you can imagine, for miles was vaporized. It was so hot indeed that at the blast site on Bikini Atoll, it turned the sand on the atoll into glass, right? So we had heard rumors that some fishermen in the area had seen a lot of gray reef sharks around Bikini Atoll. But what's really weird is gray reef sharks are considered non-migratory. And the closest atolls from Bikini Atoll were about 100 or over 100 miles away. So we went there to try to figure out, is this real? Are these actually gray reef sharks in this area? And if so, how did they get there?
And it was interesting because, we assumed that after only about 60 years, this nuclear devastation would have left the place, still just completely devastated, void of life, because as Ash said, it vaporized everything above and below the surface. And but when we got there, it was quite the opposite. While the islands have some, or still have cesium in the soil and in the sand, the dilution factor in the ocean means that the radiation is gone and it's safe to dive. And we actually dove in Castle Bravo's crater that's still there, and that is just a sandy pit that's a few hundred meters across.
Super spooky.
But right on the other side of the reef, from the Castle Bravo crater, the coral is spectacular, and the fish life. And we would get in the water, and you'd be surrounded. In fact, when we drove up on the boat, because no one ever really goes there, we were in a converted shrimp trawler for 3 weeks, and
not fun.
That was rough. We had a little curtain for a door in front of our cabin, if you could call it a cabin, and
it was a hole.
Yeah, basically. And we so when we got up there, though, you pull up around Bikini, and immediately there are 20 or 30 sharks at the back of your boat, and they're just curious, we assume, because nobody goes there. They've never seen this before. They hear this noisy thing coming in, like, what is this thing?
So like literally on the back of the boat, we're looking off the back, and there's these sharks that are like trying to position. They're like pushing off of each other to get their little heads out of the water to see what we are. Like it was almost like they were spy hopping, which is what whales do when they come up to try to look the surface. There's these sharks trying to like spy hop out of the water to look and see what we were. It was crazy.
Totally unexpected. And so we'd actually have to distract them with a little bit of blood from some fish in the water over here, then jump in a little dinghy and zoom off over here, and then jump in the water to dive, because we literally didn't want to jump into like 30 or 40. We're not afraid of sharks, but it's not a good idea to dive off of a boat into a group of 30 or 40 sharks that are at the surface right at the back of the boat.
Yeah.
Just want to minimize risk. So we jumped in a little boat and would have to zoom off, 100 yards off the stern, and then jump in the water there before the sharks realized what was going on, and then would follow and rush to see what we were underwater and swirling all around us and things like that. But the life was really extraordinary, and it really demonstrated, I think, that when given a chance, nature is incredibly resilient. As Ashlan said, it's what we're seeing here on the brief areas around the world that are getting a little bit of a respite from the constant hammering of human beings. And as a scientist that we spoke to, who had done some research in Chernobyl, said, nuclear war is bad for nature, but humans are worse. And that was a really interesting eye-opener for us. But again, demonstrated that when you give nature a chance, it can be incredibly resilient.
Because I think for me, Philippe had already had many, or a few at least, of these aha moments. But for me, it was like in my mind, I knew in theory that nature is resilient. Like I knew that, but it wasn't until that first dive in the Marshall Islands and we went under the water, and I looked around at this absolutely pristine and flourishing ecosystem that I thought to myself, my God, it's not a theory, it's staring back at me. And so that was that moment, really, truly, I think, in this second part of in this career, my second career, when I thought, it's true, like this, I don't need to talk about hope because I see it. This is hope. It's not a theory, it is real. And that to this day is still something on the dark days when we see really bad headlines and we look and like, but if it can come back after literally fire and brimstone, we threw hell on at these islands. If they can come back, there is hope.
It's a beautiful, beautiful story, and it's just amazing to have that testimonial, to be able to really see what nature is capable of, and that it really can heal itself. And we're all seeing a little bit of that right now. And this question is, what can we do to kind of keep some of it that way, and maybe change our behavior, change the way we think and live in the world, so that we can so that we can use this opportunity to create a new way of living and traveling. And that kind of goes into the next question I have for you are, what are your thoughts for a future vision of travel, and how can people travel kindly? What does that look like for you guys?
Jessica, I think what you do is amazing, and it's people, and we're seeing this. I mean, people even before the situation that we're in currently, they wanted to be responsible travelers, and they're seeking that out. And that was such a bright beam of light for us. And I think that even now, after when we all kind of come out of our lockdown, I think people are going to really choose to be even more responsible. And to us, that is really exciting.
Yeah, because tourism is a tremendous can be a tremendous source of positive empowerment. Tourism is the largest. It's an interesting statistic I always find. Tourism is the largest voluntary transfer of wealth between rich and poor in the history of humanity, and it can be transformative, as we all know. I mean, that's what this tonight is all about. What you're all about. I saw briefly in the slide when we joined that you were showing and talking really about, I think there's a great quote from Bono that shopping is politics. And, some of the kinds of things that we think about when we travel is what airlines are we traveling on, where are we going to visit, and how are those places really positively contributing to the local communities, the people. I think one of the things we have to remember about climate change or ocean acidification or, any of these big challenges that we face, it's that these are people problems. Ashlan said it earlier. It's not about polar bears. It's about people. And there's really, it's remarkable that the research that's coming out about how many deaths have been avoided during lockdown because of clean air. And so as travelers, I think, and as ambassadors of the world, we have a really, really important role to play in the choices that we make. In the shopping choices that we make, essentially, and spreading the word about how we can have contributory behavior to help support local communities and help support those responsible businesses to help tourism reach its potential for good. Because we do all see the headlines about what damage tourism can do if it's done in a really thoughtless way.
What does travel mean to you?
Growing up, I was really, really lucky to have some super cool parents, and we didn't have, we didn't go on like little small vacations. We didn't have a beach house. We didn't go to like Disney. They would save up every year and they would take us on one trip, and they considered that was part of our education. And I am so glad that my parents were able to do that. And I think for me, travel is connection, and travel is seeing people that look different than me, that speak a different language, that worship a different religion, that eat different food than me, and realizing that a smile is universal and that a laugh is universal. So for me, travel is just a connection to other humans.
I would say that for me, travel is all about adventure. I think it's about fulfilling the sense of curiosity about the unknown. My father always had a saying that adventure is what you need a full life. And so I think being able to travel is a privilege, and it is one that leads us to a full life.
I will have to say, honestly, my favorite place was Bikini Atoll. That was just absolutely incredible. I will remember that for the rest of my life.
My favorite place to dive is off the Sudanese coast in the Red Sea. In the 1960s, my father and grandfather conducted an experiment about putting a habitat underwater called Conch Shelf 4, where divers lived for 30 days, and the ruins of it are still there. So the habitat was lifted out of the water, but the submarine garage, and they had various different elements that are still there, kind of rusting away, but you can dive on them. And my father died 6 months before I was born. and in an airplane accident. And I grew up with a letter that my grandfather wrote to my father in eulogy about the time that they spent on conch shell. So I grew up reading this letter thousands of times about this moment that my father and grandfather really shared in this pioneering experiment they were conducting in the Red Sea, and getting to go there and dive there. Just so happens also that the reef there is absolutely spectacular. And the day that I was, the couple days that we were diving there were schooling hammerheads right off the reef, massive grouper and enormous reef sharks. And then you had like the conch shelf at the very top of the reef, this amazing, iconic, historical human exploration in the ocean ruin. All of it together was the most spectacular place I've ever been diving.